Sometimes trouble finds us in the last place we'd expect, right at home. This man shouted when he spotted what looked like a ball sitting in his kitchen, but what it actually was, you'll never guess. Frank had just walked in after a long, tiring day. He headed to the fridge, planning to throw together a quick sandwich, when something on the floor caught his eye. For a second, he thought maybe a slice of bread had slipped off the counter. But no, this round thing was way smaller than a loaf. There was a ball sitting on his kitchen floor. Where could it have come from? Frank didn't have kids, and the only place nearby that had young people was the university across the street. And those students weren't usually tossing balls around in their spare time. The whole thing just didn't make sense. But what really got to Frank was how strange the little ball looked. It wasn't just sitting there, it looked like something was stuck to it. For reasons he couldn't explain, the sight of it made his skin crawl. Still, he couldn't just ignore it. He crouched down, slowly reached out his hand, just about to touch it. And then the thing moved. It uncurled right in front of him, sprouted tiny legs, and darted away. Frank jumped back and let out a yell, startled by the sudden burst of movement. A second later, he was laughing at himself. Here he was, a grown man, getting scared by a little critter scurrying across his kitchen. But it was clear now. This wasn't a ball or a rock. This was a living creature. The little thing had disappeared under his kitchen cupboards. Frank felt his curiosity grow. He didn't have pets, and animals weren't a usual part of his day, but he cared deeply about every creature, no matter how small. He didn't know what it was, but he knew he wanted to help, even if it just meant getting it safely back outside. Frank lay down on the floor and peered underneath the cupboards. There it was again, curled back up, perfectly still. He had never seen anything like it. This time he moved closer with more care. Knowing it was alive made him more gentle. He used a flashlight but kept the beam soft, not shining it directly into the creature's face. The light showed enough. The little animal had skin that almost looked human. But here and there, pieces of something hard, like tiny sticks, were poking out from its body. Frank's chest tightened. It had to be in pain. He thought of his friends, Alan and Anita. They ran a wildlife sanctuary, helping animals that were hurt or lost. If anyone could figure out what this was and how to help, it was them. Even curled up, the little creature was shaking. It was scared, hurting. Frank didn't want to make things worse, so he grabbed the softest gloves he owned, thick winter ones, and gently prepared to help. Frank was afraid that touching the little animal might hurt him even more, so he did everything he could to be gentle. He got a box ready and lined it with a soft blanket to keep the creature warm and comfortable. Then came the hard part, actually getting the animal into the box. But this little guy wasn't ready to give up. Every time Frank got close, it scurried away. Frank started to worry that he might be stressing the poor thing out even more. Maybe it would be better to just leave it alone for the night and try again later. But then the animal made a run for it, right into a corner with no way out. Frank moved slowly, giving it a moment, then gently reached down and picked it up. He had seen the tiny sharp teeth in its mouth earlier. That was one of the reasons he'd worn gloves, but the creature didn't snap or try to bite. It just let him lift it and carefully place it inside the box. Then it curled back into a tight ball and didn't move at all. Frank didn't wait. He looked once at the sandwich ingredients on his table, gave a little sigh, then closed the door behind him and headed straight to the animal sanctuary. He called ahead to let Alan and Anita know he was coming. But nothing he said over the phone could have prepared them for what they were about to see. The moment they laid eyes on the little animal, both of them were speechless. They'd seen some rough cases over the years, but this one brought tears to their eyes. Right away, they knew what the animal was. Frank had been completely in the dark, and he told them how he'd seen this strange ball in his kitchen, screamed when it moved, and finally realized it was alive. Alan and Anita were finally able to explain. What Frank had found was a hedgehog. But not just any hedgehog. This one was in terrible shape. Frank had seen hedgehogs before, but this poor creature looked nothing like the ones he remembered. The hard, stick-like things poking out of its skin? Those were its quills. They were supposed to cover and protect its entire body. But here, large patches were completely bare. The missing quills didn't look like they had fallen out naturally. Anita gently suggested they might have been pulled out, though she hated to even say it. The quills that remained were chopped down, cut unnaturally short, most likely with scissors. Someone had hurt this hedgehog on purpose. Without his quills, he had no way to protect himself. And yet, that might not have been the worst of it. The little hedgehog was making soft squeaking sounds, quiet, pained cries that told them something else was going on inside. Alan and Anita had been doing this kind of work for years, and they both agreed. This was the worst case they had ever seen. It even looked like the little hedgehog, who they now called Frankie, named after the man who found him, had been used as a soccer ball. No one could say for sure, but the way his body was bruised and the damage he had, it was heartbreaking. They still had no idea where he'd come from. Frank lived in the middle of the city, and hedgehogs weren't exactly common in his neighborhood. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was helping him. He needed a vet, fast. When they checked him over, they noticed his gums had almost no color left, a sign that he might be just hours away from losing his life. Even though Anita wore gloves and handled him with care, Frankie let out soft groans with every touch. He was in deep pain. They had treated hedgehogs before, so they knew which pain medicine was safe. They gave him a few drops to help calm him down, just enough so he could rest and not feel every breath. It also made it easier to move him. Carefully, they placed him back into the same box Frank had brought him in. Then they called the vet who regularly worked with the sanctuary. Thankfully, he was willing to meet them right away for a full exam. Frank decided to let them take it from there. He headed home, finally ready to make that sandwich, but promised to help with any vet bills and stay in touch about Frankie's progress. At the vet's office, things turned out to be even worse than expected. Frankie was dangerously dehydrated. His little body had almost no fluids left. If Frank had decided to leave him alone that night, he wouldn't have made it till morning. The vet also found he had ringworm, a contagious skin infection. That explained the raw, patchy skin and some of the missing quills. Thankfully, everyone had worn gloves when handling him. Ringworm could spread to humans too. As bad as that was, Alan and Anita couldn't help but think of one small bit of hope. If whoever hurt Frankie hadn't worn gloves, maybe they'd picked up the infection. It wasn't justice, but it was something. They began treating Frankie right away, giving him fluids and preparing to do x-rays. Finally, some good news. He didn't have any broken bones. That was one thing they didn't have to worry about. His tiny body had been through enough already. Any win, even a small one, meant a lot. The next few weeks would be crucial. This was when they'd find out if Frankie was going to survive, and maybe, one day, even make it back into the wild. Once he was hydrated enough, the vet sent him home with Alan and Anita. He started eating a little more each day. His skin was still in rough shape, but healing would take time. Months even. But he was improving, and that was what mattered. Then one night, things took a turn again. When they checked on him, Frankie was groaning in pain. It was a sound they hadn't heard in days, and one they hoped they'd never hear again. He was lying on his side, not moving much. They knew right away. Something was wrong. They rushed him back to the vet. After more tests, the vet found something they had missed earlier, another parasite. It had been hiding, but now it was causing serious problems. He had to be treated for that, too. Only after this new round of care did Frankie truly start to get better. Slowly but surely, his energy came back. He started chirping at night, playing a little, moving around more confidently. Every time they heard him exploring or saw him getting curious again, it felt like a small miracle. Every little sound he made was a victory. Frank stopped by to visit and check on Frankie, and he was honestly shocked at how much better the little hedgehog looked. His skin had healed, and in some spots his quills had even started growing back. Everyone hoped that, in time, all of them would return. Without those quills, Frankie couldn't go back to the wild. He'd have no way to defend himself from predators. As the months passed, something became clear. Frankie didn't quite behave like a wild hedgehog. He wanted attention, lots of it. Even most pet hedgehogs don't warm up completely to people, and cuddling isn't really their thing. But Frankie was different. From the second he saw someone walk near his enclosure, he would hurry over to them, eager to be picked up. There was nothing he liked more than curling up on Anita's lap and snoozing there for hours. They tried to prepare him for life in the wild. They gave him a few live worms to hunt, just to see how he'd react. But instead of showing interest, Frankie got spooked. He backed off and crawled into the tunnel in his enclosure, refusing to even look at them. He clearly preferred fruit and cat food. That's when Alan and Anita started to wonder, was Frankie ever truly wild? Could he have been someone's pet who got lost? Or worse, was he hurt by the person who once cared for him? They would probably never know. As much as they hoped to get Frankie ready for a release, it became more and more obvious. It wasn't going to happen. Almost a full year had passed since Frank first found that ball in his kitchen. A year is a long time for a hedgehog who might only live about 5 years total. And even now, his quills hadn't completely grown back. There were still soft spots, areas where a predator could easily injure him. But even more than that, he still trusted people with his whole heart. That kind of trust was beautiful. But for a wild animal, it could be deadly. So the decision was made. Frankie would never go back to the wild. Whatever his past had been, Alan and Anita were going to make sure his future was safe, happy, and full of love. And since Frankie loved being with people, but also liked to explore, they built him something special. They created a big indoor and outdoor enclosure just for him. He could soak up the sunshine, dig in the dirt, and still come back inside to rest and curl up beside his humans. Frankie had survived so much, and somehow, through it all, he never stopped trusting. His story is a reminder that even when things get really hard, there's still hope, and still kind people who care. Frankie would be loved for the rest of his life, and he'd never be hurt again. Thanks for watching. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring animal stories like this one. See you next time.